When the noise finally stopped, I didn't notice at first. I'd grown used to the hum of generators, the whine of engines overhead, the static of endless broadcasts. But that morning, there was only air thin, trembling, soundless air. For the first time since the ship arrived, Earth seemed to inhale. I stood outside the research compound, the desert stretching away in pale gold. Above me, the alien vessel still hovered motionless, enormous, a continent of metal and light. Its underside shimmered like heat on asphalt, reflecting a sun that barely reached the ground. Yet the ship no longer emitted the low resonance that had filled the atmosphere since its descent. It was quiet. Some people called it peace. Others, the pause before extinction. I remember touching the side of the truck beside me, just to confirm that the world still existed. The metal felt warm under my palm, real, ordinary, human. Inside the control tent. The monitors showed every time zone, every live feed we still had. The same scene replayed across continents, people standing in the streets, staring upward. From Tokyo to Cairo to the ruins of Manhattan, faces turned to the same silent sky. No governments broadcast. No generals shouted orders. Even the air traffic had frozen in place, as if gravity had taken pity and held its breath too. I should have felt relief after days of chaos. But silence carries its own kind of terror. You start to hear your heartbeat in it, your own thoughts, and the ship, though unmoving, seemed to listen. I dictated a field note that morning. Observation, 48 hours since complete auditory cessation. Possible atmospheric interference. Possible communication protocol. My voice sounded brittle against the recorder's hiss. Scientific language is armor. If I name the silence, perhaps it couldn't devour me. Captain Orion Voss found me a few minutes later. Dust covered his flight suit. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleeplessness. They've grounded the recon flights, he said. Engines won't ignite. Every jet, every drone. Even the birds are grounded, Elara. He wasn't exaggerating. The night before, we'd watched entire flocks collapse mid-flight, gliding to the ground unharmed, but unwilling to rise again. Something in the air, or perhaps in them, refused motion. Maybe it's mercy, I told him. He looked at me as if I blasphemed. We tried to resume analysis, measuring the electromagnetic field around the craft, comparing data from before and after the silence, but the instruments returned nothing. No readings. As if the ship had erased physics in a perfect radius around itself. So instead we waited. Waiting, it turns out, is the hardest experiment of all. I found myself thinking about the first time I looked through a telescope as a child. My father had carried it to the roof during a meteor shower. I'd expected fireworks. What I found was stillness. Infinite dark, punctured by patient light. That same hush lives inside the cosmos. I think the same hush now pressing against Earth. Maybe they hadn't brought silence with them. Maybe they'd only reminded us what the universe already sounded like, trickled through unofficial channels, shortwave whispers from surviving amateur radios. Entire coastal regions without power. Ocean currents shifting. The moon's orbit altering by fractions no one could explain. And always. The quiet at dusk, I walked to the observation ridge. Orion followed but didn't speak. Below us, the desert base glowed faintly, its lights dimmed to conserve power. The ship hovered miles above, framed against clouds that refused to move. I remember thinking, this is what myth feels like before it hardens into religion. The air carried a faint metallic scent, like rain on steel. I realized then that the silence wasn't absence, it was compression. A waiting frequency coiled. Sometime after midnight, the first stars began to vanish. Not all at once, but in wave sections of the night sky turning blank, as though a curtain passed across them. Astronomers later called it optical occlusion. To me, it felt personal. The universe withdrawing its gaze. I tried to record spectral data, but the sensors flatlined. When I lifted my eyes again, I caught my own reflection in the glass, pale, small, surrounded by nothingness. For a second, I thought I saw movement behind me, light bending, but when I turned, there was only Orion, his face half lit by the dying monitor. "Do you hear that?" He whispered. I listened. The silence had changed pitch. It wasn't a sound, exactly, more like pressure inside the skull, a resonance that nudged thought itself. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. My breath left in a shiver. "That wasn't external," I said. "No," he answered. "It was in us. We didn't tell the others. Scientists are trained to doubt anomalies until they repeat. But that night, everyone at the base reported the same dream, standing beneath a white ocean, hearing voices through the water, words they couldn't remember upon waking. I wrote, "Possible subconscious communication attempt." What I meant was, they're speaking and we're not built to hear them. The following morning, the ship lowered barely perceptible, perhaps 50 meters. Sand swirled in gentle spirals beneath it. Not destruction, not aggression. A gesture. As the sun rose, its light refracted around the hull, splitting into spectral halos. The colors drifted like auroras, forming shapes too symmetrical to be chance. Equations, maybe? Or invitations. I wanted to step closer, to answer in kind, but command protocols kept us distant. Human caution, the most powerful force we've ever engineered. Orion stood beside me, visor down. "If they wanted us dead, we'd already be gone," he said. I almost laughed. "That's your argument for trust?" He shrugged. "You said once that communication starts with risk." I had said that years ago, during a lecture that feels ancient now. The first signal from an alien mind will be fear disguised as curiosity. And here we were, terrified, curious, alive. By noon. A new phenomenon, wind returning, faint but deliberate, as if the planet exhaled after holding its breath too long. The sound of it moved people to tears. Soldiers removed helmets, scientists left their instruments. Civilians stepped from shelters just to feel air again. The sky above remained heavy, muted blue. But something unseen was stirring within it. I looked at the data pad and my hands blank screens. Powerless devices, and realized the old instruments would never read this language. We'd need to learn to listen differently. That's when the pulse returned. This time it came through the ground, a deep vibration, rhythmic, almost musical. The desert floor rippled like the surface of water. We fell silent again, not from fear, but reverence. The ship glowed brighter, light crawling across its hull like veins of liquid metal. Then abruptly, everything stopped. The hum, the motion, the light gone. Only the faint echo remained in our bones. And above us, the sky itself changed color, draining to a pale gray, like film burned at the edges. Birds began to rise again, hesitant, circling. Their cries sounded unnatural after so much quiet. I whispered into the recorder. "They have altered the atmosphere's resonance. Purpose unknown." But privately, I thought, the silence wasn't their weapon. It was their language. After the pulse faded, we waited for night again, because night now was the only time we could measure change. The daylight sky had become too pale, too even, as though the sun itself had been folded inside a filter we could no longer adjust. That evening, Orion and I sat on the ridge with the portable receiver between us. It was an antique analog coils, hand-cranked, power immune to the digital blackout that silenced the world's networks. Each slow turn of the crank gave us a few seconds of faint static, like breathing through distance. At first there was nothing. Then a pattern, 3 short bursts, 1 long. Pause, repeat, not radio. Not sound. Vibration traveling through the rock beneath us. I wrote the sequence down, line by line, until my notebook looked like the pulse of a heartbeat. "What if it's coordinates?" Orion asked. "Or a countdown," I said. He smiled without humor. Optimist. We sent the data through what little we could still transmit low-band channels, the remnants of NASA's deep space network. No reply, only echoes of our own message returning from the static. The world, it seemed, had gone deaf. The days that followed blurred together. Sunrises arrived without warmth. Shadows no longer obeyed their angles. Somewhere over the Atlantic, satellites began to drift from orbit. When they burned in re-entry, they didn't fall. They simply vanished, as if swallowed by air. I should have documented each anomaly, but something in me rebelled against record keeping. I found myself staring at the horizon for hours, waiting for the sky to blink dot on the fifth day. I heard the pulse again, this time inside the laboratory, though no instruments were running. It came through the walls, the tables, the glass of a microscope. Every molecule hummed at the same frequency, and beneath it, faintly, another sound, whispering, layered. Countless voices speaking in synchronization. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I pressed the palm of my hand to the metal surface of the desk and whispered back, "Who are you?" The hum stopped. That night, I dreamed of the ocean. Only it wasn't water, it was light. Endless, weightless light. I floated above it, unable to tell whether I was falling or rising. Beneath the surface, shadows moved in perfect order, like thoughts crossing a mind too vast for language. When I woke, the ship had changed dot. It was lower half its previous altitude, and a single beam extended from its underside, thin as a thread, touching the desert floor. The point of contact shimmered like glass dot. No one dared approach at first. Drones failed, electronics jammed. But curiosity outweighs fear, eventually. By afternoon, I volunteered. Orion argued, of course. "You don't even know what it is." "I know it's an answer," I said. He walked with me until the sand began to vibrate under our boots. Then he stopped. "If it goes wrong, I pull you back," he said. "Even if you hate me for it?" "I already hate you for saying that," I replied and stepped forward. The air near the beam was cool, charged like standing at the mouth of a storm. Tiny particles floated upward in slow spirals, defying gravity. When I reached out, the light did not burn. It felt like static, a boundary between materials, neither solid nor gas. Through it, I saw images. Not pictures, but impressions. Circles within circles, shapes folding through one another like geometry taught to dream. I felt my pulse sinking with it. Then I heard a voice, not in my ears, but behind thought. "Do you remember us?" I stumbled back, heart hammering. Orion caught my arm. "Elara?" "I heard them," I whispered. "They said, 'Do you remember us?'" He looked around, hand on his weapon as if the word us implied an army. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but I think they've been here before." We retreated to the base. I replayed the recorder, nothing but wind. No voice, no pulse. Only my breathing. But on the spectrogram, faint frequencies appeared between human hearing structures, repeating in ratios identical to DNA sequences. They weren't talking to us. They were talking through us dot by midnight. Half the team reported hearing faint whispers, seeing flashes of light behind closed eyes. The silence had become contagious. Where it spread, machines failed, but minds awakened. I began to wonder if the ship's purpose was an invasion or contact, but translation turning us into receivers. 2 days later, the beam expanded. It wasn't violent. It unfolded gently, covering the valley in pale luminescence. Anything within it rocks, tense. Vehicles cast no shadow. We stood inside and felt weightless, though our feet never left the ground. The sensation was both terror and relief. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the beam withdrew. The ship rose higher until it was a distant glint against the dimmed sun, but the silence remained. Deeper now, thicker, like velvet pressing against the senses. Even the wind refused to return. That evening, Orion asked me a question I couldn't answer. What if the silence isn't what they brought? What if it's what they're taking? Taking? Sound, energy, maybe consciousness itself. I shook my head. No, it feels like they're waiting for something. He looked toward the horizon. Then we'd better decide what to say. I spent the next night alone in the lab, recording thoughts into the dead console, hoping the act itself counted as dialogue. I think the silence is a medium, I told the empty room. Like water. They move through it. We drown in it. I paused, staring at the waveform flat, unchanging. If you can hear this, we're listening. The moment I said it, every monitor flickered on. For 3 seconds, the entire screen filled with a symbol in orbit intersecting a spiral, shifting like breath. Then blackness again. My chest felt weightless. They heard. The following dawn was not dawn at all. The sun rose, but its light arrived late seconds delayed, like a heartbeat skipping. The sky, still gray, rippled once as though reality itself trembled. Across the desert, a low echo rolled neither thunder nor quake. And then, from the direction of the ship, a new sound emerged, not silence, not hum. Music. A slow, harmonic tone that carried miles through the dead air, vibrating inside bone and thought alike. It wasn't melody as we know it. It was architecture, sound shaped into meaning. I felt tears on my face before I understood why. For the first time since they came, the sky was no longer silent. Orion found me outside, eyes fixed upward. They're changing frequency again. I know, I said. They're answering. The tone grew stronger, filling every corner of the valley until words were impossible. My notebook slipped from my hand. Inside the sound, I sensed images, oceans, cities, stars, collapsing into one another, then reforming. A timeline folding dot. When it finally stopped, the sky cleared. True blue, unfiltered. The ship was gone, but etched into the desert floor where the beam had touched, a spiral remained vast, perfect. Humming softly when the wind passed over it, I knelt beside it, placed my hand on the warm sand, and heard a single sentence rise through my skin. We remember you. Then silence again, pure, infinite, patient, and I realized the terrifying truth. The silence was not their message ending. It was their invitation beginning.